Okay, so hello and welcome back to Leah Tries. Today I am going to be talking about things not to say to a person with a mental illness. Oh, B. It's good. My dog's here today, so enjoy. So this is just some stuff that I thought of sort of off the top of my head, things that felt relevant to me. I saw the idea for this video on a different person's blog, someone who also talks about mental illness, and I thought that it would be an interesting thing to do on my channel. So I just kind of thought about general stuff that I thought, you know, things that other people have mentioned to me. Things that other people have mentioned to me, and you know, things that bother them, things that, you know, are insensitive or stuff like that. I just want to talk about them and maybe give some better alternatives, and just give you guys sort of an idea of what people don't like to hear when you speak to them about their mental illness. So I just want to mention that there are some obvious exceptions to this rule, and that would be like if you're very close to someone, if it's a very close family member, then you can obviously set your boundaries with them and they can set their boundaries with you. Just in terms of what they're willing to discuss and what they're maybe not willing to discuss. So, you know, obviously if you know someone very well, it's very easy for them to like maybe talk to you about how to talk about this type of thing. But sometimes you might be speaking to someone that you don't know that well, and a lot of this stuff has been said to me or to someone that I know, so I just wanted to talk about them. So the first one is, it's all in your head. And I always find this one funny because I feel like people seem to think that just because something's in your head that makes it less real somehow, and that's definitely not the case. There's a lot of biological, you know, physiological components to it. I mentioned that in my other video, sort of the 4 different ways of looking at it, and one of them is physical or chemical, and that's definitely not something that's, you know, just something you can imagine away. The next one is, are you on medication or are you on therapy? So for these ones, this is just something that I think you shouldn't ask someone if you don't know them well overall, because it's something that's very personal. Medication is a really big decision. A lot of people don't like being dependent on medication, and they might not be comfortable talking about it because, yeah, a lot of people just, there's a big stigma around, you know, medication and antidepressants, and a lot of people don't want to be associated with that. And the same goes for therapy. A lot of people still think that it's for people who are weak, people who, you know, struggle to cope. You know, a lot of people think a lot of different things about therapy because of the stigma around mental illness, and you know, that's a really good reason why you shouldn't bring it up with someone that you don't know well. But another alternative that I would give for this type of subject matter is maybe just to encourage them to seek options if they need help with something, stuff like that. You know, just encouragement and empathy rather than, you know, prying to get information, because that can make someone feel really uncomfortable, especially if they're not comfortable talking about stuff like that. You know, I'm a very open person about this kind of thing, but not everyone is. Okay. So the next one is, you are such a buzzkill. And this is something that has been said to me, and something that I've definitely said to other people, like even people that I, like now looking back, would guess might have been struggling with some sort of mental illness, or you know, even just sort of growing pains, like like growing up and not really knowing boundaries with people, stuff like that. And you know, when someone is struggling emotionally, often they feel really guilty and awful about, you know, burdening other people just with their presence. So if you tell them that they're a buzzkill, often that has a really massive effect, because they already feel like they're, like, I don't know, this is from my experience, like I've felt like awful and antisocial, and like I just don't want to be around people, and then I try to see friends, and then they might tell me I'm being a buzzkill, and then, you know, I've already put myself out there trying to be social, trying to act normal, and then you sort of get shut down. So it's just not a, like, I feel like there's just a more nice way to say it. So I think something that would be better is, again, like a more empathetic route, which would be, you know, you look kind of down, are you feeling all right? Like, is everything okay? You know, don't go in sort of with like an attack, rather try to kind of see things from their perspective, because often antisocial behavior is associated with mental illness in different ways and at different times. I'll do some more definition work soon. I really want to do that at some point. I just have not gotten to it, but I will definitely be making videos on that soon. So the next one is, you're not suicidal, right? This is something that's been said to me personally, where I speak to someone about, you know, being depressed or anxious, and they're like, oh, so like how's your, like, do you deal with suicide, like, that's just, again, it's something that you should probably only speak to someone about if you know them really well. It's really a very personal thing, and for some reason, I don't know, like, a lot of people feel like they can ask you stuff like that if they know something about you, like that you have a mental illness. They think that they can assume stuff about you, and generally I think the rule should be that you shouldn't assume stuff about people. Most of the stuff is common sense. I just want to cover some stuff that again, I feel like it comes from a really good place. It comes from people wanting to either know more about the subject or about me and how I'm doing, and I know that it comes from a really nice place. It just doesn't always go down well. And the next one is another really good example of a question that a lot of people have asked me. More than one person's asked me, why am I depressed? And that's such an interesting question to ask, because it's such a complicated answer. It's not really something you can just be like, oh yeah, it's this or it's that. It's way more complicated than that, and often people don't really know themselves. You know, they might often in families, people don't talk about their mental illness, so you might not even know that you have a lot of people in your family dealing with the same stuff, and that there might be a genetic component. You know, some people just don't know. Some people are only beginning to deal with it and might, you know, still be learning a lot about where it might be coming from and what they can do to help themselves and help others around them. But you know, it's really tough, and that's a really tough question to even think about. So I just think that that's just something that you talk to someone you're very close to if they're trying to figure something out. But yeah, I think it's a very silly question, because there's really not a very easy or simple answer that you can just give someone, especially a stranger. So the next one is sort of just something when friends see that I'm down and they want to suggest something like, oh, let's go clubbing, or let's go to a bar, or, you know, let's go to a party. You know, like I said earlier, like, mental illness can give you antisocial behavior. So often if you like doing something like clubbing, for instance, you might stop wanting to do that for a while, and, you know, similar social situations. So, you know, a better way to approach it might be, you know, what do you want to do? What will help you to feel better or calmer, or, you know, depending on what the person's dealing with. You know, like, again, it's always like, I always tend to go for the more empathetic route when speaking to anyone, because it's you feel really isolated in your head, and people prying on stuff just can be really jarring if you're someone who gets trapped in your head, and that's very much the type of person that I am. Sometimes someone will try to talk to me about something and I've been so caught in my head, I feel like I'm just like, oh shit. So basically just what it comes down to is maybe just consider that the person isn't at 100%, and they won't necessarily want to do things that they normally would if they were at 100%. So stuff like clubbing, stuff like just things that take up a lot of energy, whether it's emotional or mental or physical energy, you know, stuff like that can be really hard to do if you're in a bad headspace. So it can just maybe, you know, at least find out where the person's at in terms of what they feel like doing, because it really does have an effect on your behavior, especially in social scenarios. So the next part that I want to talk about is sort of unknowing, unconstructive advice, which is sort of the advice that I've been given by people who don't really deal with a mental illness themselves, or they've only sort of noted things about mental illness from someone else who suffered from it. And often there's a lot of stuff that can be misunderstood or misinterpreted, and also just some pieces of advice don't really work the same for people with mental illnesses, I think, in my opinion. This is all just sort of my opinion. So I'm gonna obviously give you just a short list of these pieces of unconstructive advice. But again, I'm saying all of this in full knowledge that it really comes from a good place when people try to give you advice. So I've been told that I should just wait until it gets better. And that's something that I think that it is true to a degree, because if you suffer from depressive episodes, it's, you know, it's something that starts and ends. So it's it's not going to go on forever. There's always a period where you'll start to feel better again, because that's just sort of naturally how people with depression go, you know, especially with like any mental illness that has to do with mood instability will have an effect on that. I think that a better piece of advice would be to encourage someone to spend the time waiting to get better, but like spending that time just more constructively, like doing stuff to maybe speed up the process of recovery and to like sort of nurse yourself back to health. My therapist always used to tell me that, you know, if you had a broken leg, you wouldn't be expected to run on it on the first day. I mean, you'd nurse your leg back to health and slowly get back up to, you know, walking, then jogging, then running. And it's the same with a mental illness. You know, you have a broken bone for a while and you need to nurse it. And that's just a really good piece of advice to give someone who's struggling with something like that. It can make them feel just like they're not totally powerless. Like there is stuff for them to do. They just need to find out more, and often it's, you know, their choice and their journey to do that, but it's really good to encourage people who struggle with stuff like that to not suffer alone. So the next one is, don't tell your family because it will worry them. This is something that's also been told to me personally, and I think that that's just it's just awful, because it's like, if you are a depressed, anxious person, it's your absolute worst nightmare to be a burden on someone. And this statement just makes you immediately feel that awful sense of guilt and like you're a burden, and like you just want to crawl up in a corner and like not damage anyone around you, because you feel like, that's just what again, this is all from my perspective, that's what I feel like when that happens, or when I've been told that. And when I think about stuff in that way. And the truth is that when you are going through a tough emotional or mental place, often the people that you need the most are your family and your friends. And maybe, like, for me, I feel like my friends and my family need to know if I'm not in a good place, because I'm not 100%. I don't feel like doing all the things that I normally would, and I often have to take care of myself more, like I mentioned earlier. So I prefer to have people around me know, and I think that like having them know and having them check up on me is a really good way for them to know that I'm okay, or at least if I'm going through a tough time, at least they know that I'm doing something to fix it. I just think that piece of advice, it really adds to a lot of the negative thoughts that a person already has when they're in a bad headspace, and it's just really not good advice. The next one is that you should go on medication, or you should go off of medication, you know, depending on what your situation might be. This is just something that I don't think anyone should deliver comment on for someone else. Like I waited for a long time to go on medication because I was really scared about being dependent on medication, like having to take a pill every day in order to feel okay. Just seemed like, I don't know, I just didn't want to do that. I was really afraid of doing that, and I ended up getting to a point where my therapist suggested that I wasn't able to cope without medical assistance anymore, and we ended up making that decision together. But it was a really hard decision to make, and not everyone is prepared to have that discussion or have you know whether they're on medication or not. So just don't go there unless it's someone you're very close to. Just don't go there. It's not your business. It really sucks because I know that it comes from a good place and people wanting to help, but it's just not always constructive. So the next one is, like, I've been told that I should use my mind and my logic to basically understand that although I feel depressed, I have nothing to be depressed about, or although I'm feeling anxious, I have nothing to feel anxious about, or whatever I'm feeling anxious about isn't as bad as my anxiety is making it out to be, you know, depending on what you're struggling with. People have told me that, you know, you should just think your mental illness away. You can just, you know, I don't know how they think it works. You just use your brain to fix your brain. And, you know, I think that definitely works to a degree if you look at sort of therapy and, you know, psychodynamic methods to improve your patterns of thinking, things like that. But at the same time, like any illness, it's a real thing that needs a real treatment. It's not like, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people think that it's sort of made up, or that it's just people that can't really get their shit together. I don't know. And again, it's a medical condition. It's not really something you can just fix by thinking about. I can think about healing my broken leg all day and it's not gonna make a difference. That being said, you know, maybe if I thought about my actions more and didn't get my leg broken in the first place, that's where therapy comes in. If I don't know if I'm using this metaphor too much. I feel like I might be making it too complicated. So I've also been told to pretend like it's not affecting me so that, you know, it won't change my life, because I've always been really afraid of, you know, what type of work will I be able to do if I'm an anxious person? Like, will I be able to go to work consistently, you know, if I struggle to just be okay consistently? I don't know, it's really like scary to think about stuff like that. And, you know, pretending like none of that's going on just to sort of save face with people, I don't think that that's constructive. Again, like, I'm sure anyone who watches my channel knows that I'm all about open communication. So that's just not my style. And I wanted to end off this video with a more positive note, to just tell you guys some good stuff to say, or some alternatives to some of the things that I've mentioned. So one thing that's really nice to say to someone is that it's okay to feel the way that you do, because mental illness really makes you feel so isolated, and not everyone knows a lot of other people who are mentally ill or struggle with stuff like that. So letting them know that the way they're feeling, it's normal, it's human, it happens to some people and it really sucks, but you know, there's a way out. And just letting them know that, like, no one feels good all the time. Sometimes feeling bad is just a part of life, and even though that can be a really terrifying prospect when you have mental health issues, you have to accept the bad parts along with the good ones. So another one is, you can talk to me if you need to. So that's just a good way, if you are, for instance, not close with someone, it's a good way to get closer to them, to open yourself up, to have conversations like that. Because I don't know, I have a desire to talk about sort of what's going on in my head really often. I think it's just the type of person I am. I share my problems with people, and I sort of talk about them until I process them fully, and that's just, yeah, open communication is my style. So the last one is, I know that you're in a tough place, and to offer support. And again, this is just acknowledging that someone, you know, isn't in the best place, and that there is like help for them if they want it. So I hope that this just gave you a little bit of perspective just on how people feel about, you know, how you talk about mental illness. I think that, you know, a few good rules of thumb is to sort of take a very empathetic route when you speak to someone. You know, try to think about the way that they feel, as well as to not assume stuff and not to pry too much into, you know, what's going on with someone and where they're at and what they're doing. You know, not everyone is prepared to share that information, and it's important to be sensitive about it. And again, just a last reminder, of course, if you are close to someone, it is of course like fine for you to talk about these things in as much detail and depth as you want to. It's just, you know, this is all stuff that have sort of come up in, you know, common public conversations, and things that sort of just didn't really work for me. But again, it's just all my opinion. Okay, thank you so much for watching my video. I hope that you guys learned something. I hope that, that you at least found this video interesting, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.